What's up guys, my name is Robin and I make stuff. Today we're going to be using art from the artist Sikander Singh. He paints very loosely in watercolor, and that's something that inspires me. I'm trying to get my students in my beginning watercolor class to not focus so much on the tiny details, but to paint bigger shapes and focus on the details at the very end. I also am trying to work on paying attention to the negative space, leaving the white. It's challenging to do that when we just want to paint those fine details and then it becomes overdone and overworked. This artist does a great job at leaving the whites and painting very simply and very bold and very loose. And so we're going to go on that journey today and try and figure out how he accomplishes that, and if we can do the same thing without having seen any videos of how he does this. I will put a link to his Instagram profile in the description so that you can give him a follow as well. His stuff is great. As usual, if you find this video helpful, you like hanging out with me, I love that for you. I love that for me. Hit the like button on this video. And if you haven't already done so, I would love it if you became a subscriber. I love hanging out with you. So let's stop talking about this and just get into it. Here is who we're following today. And let me show you the exact piece of art that we're working on. This is the piece of artwork that I saw and I was like, oh, this is really cool. We have this really great white space left right in the middle where the waterfall is falling. I love that. It's gonna be easy. We're just gonna not paint that part. Duh. The sky is very light. We've got this mountain range in the back. It's also very light. And if we're looking at shapes and focusing on the shapes of color, we see that he's got this kind of big shape of color with some jaggedy edges in there. And then there's leaving the whites. We're actually gonna paint the paper just a little bit so it's not as stark white as this waterfall is back here. He's got some really nice things going on. These trees that come down into this soft area, some sort of wet on wet technique. Same here with his rock faces. You can see that he's got some pencil lines in there where he drew a guide and then just kind of laid some color in there and then some more color on top of that, I'm assuming, kind of wet into wet once he put the wet on there. Then he's got these really cool slabs of rock here in the middle of this waterfall, and I really like that. They become kind of interesting, but I'm guessing that he kind of painted those just sort of a solid color and then came back with these, you know, edges, these darker edges, and just kind of put those in there and then threw some soft color in there, wet it down, and just let the watercolor paint itself and get really nice and soft in there. He's not using a lot of details for these boulders, just really soft color, dark values to then accentuate the lighter color that he left on top. And then in his waterfall section here, kind of cool, he's got those little tiny blue lines in there that I'm assuming he just went bloop, 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 and that was kind of it, leaving the whites around it. You don't have to draw any of that in. You literally just go in with your paintbrush and paint those in. Same with these little tiny rocks that he has here kind of floating around. Just paint those in with your paintbrush. He's got these hard, clean edges right here and then all this softness. I also noticed that this edge right there was nice and hard, but this is soft over here. So I'm assuming he's got some wet on wet and then over here is dry and he just takes his paintbrush across into that dry section and kind of comes down and leaves it. What are these white spots? Are you masking those out? Or like, what's happening down here? Do we mask that out? My answer is, I don't think that's what he did. I think that he's painting so quickly and so loosely that he's skipping over some spots and leaving those white. Could you mask them? Yes. But we want to focus on being loose and not having as much control, letting the watercolor paint itself. That's the key. So yes, you could totally mask those off, but you don't have to. If you're going to paint real loose, you're going to automatically leave some white spots, and I'm going to show you how we do that. And he's got some nice turquoise color down here, which is kind of fun considering the rest of it's very earth tone, browns and blues and greens, and then this nice turquoise color. And then he's got these kind of runoffs of the water reflection. I think he just took a brush and just went down there, and maybe it's a little wet still, just maybe. But those streaks are pretty exact, and so I think that he just kind of took a paintbrush and went straight down. We're gonna try it out, but these are also just some blobs in here, blobs of black that he's just putting in there and just kind of letting it go, and you don't have to think too hard about it, although we all want to think really hard about, like, how the heck am I supposed to do that? Just don't think about it too much. Just like maybe even like close your eyes, put your paintbrush, okay, actually don't do that. That'd be a different painting to try that on. I'm guessing he probably painted this in an hour or less, would be my guess. Very fast. We're going to start painting very light blue on the sky because, again, I don't think this color here that you're seeing is the same as this color right here, which is the paper white. So we're going to do a very light blue all the way down into our where our trees are down here, and then maybe over the top of this rock face here, just so it's soft and doesn't have like a hard white edge. And then we'll drop in some darker blue, and that will be our wet on wet kind of doing its magic. All right, let's do it. This whole thing all the way down to here, light blue. This is going to be white in here, so we want to focus our white attention focal point right there. Leave that unpainted until the very end. Light blue down into these rocks, and we'll soften it up so it doesn't leave a hard edge. Then we'll drop some darker blue to symbolize those clouds. Okay, so here's my ultramarine blue. I'm going to get that pretty watered down, meaning I'm going to add a lot of water to it. I want it to be pretty light. It's going to dry lighter, but I want this color, see how this is white. We'll say that's our paper white. And then here's the color we're using. So obviously it's darker than our paper. It's going to go on feeling very light, and that's okay. I'm just going to kind of go across here very quickly. Don't think too hard about this. I have a lot of people that I see that paint like this. You don't have time for that right now. We want it to be nice and wet and for it to stay wet. Let me get some more color in here. Okay, so coming down over my mountains, over my rock faces, down into here, get a little bit of water on my brush and just kind of pull that down. Yes, over my mountain. Don't freak out about that. It's going to be fine. Okay, clean my brush off, dry it off just a little bit, and just kind of soften those edges down into where you're painting so you don't have any real hard edges. Now, this is all wet, so let's drop some wet paint into it where we're seeing those dark blues. So I'm going to get some of that ultramarine blue, darker than what this is. Now I'm going to be putting it into water on my paper, which means it's going to thin out just a little bit. But let's just kind of focus it in this area up here at the top, kind of skipping around just a little bit. And I can see that my paper is already drying pretty significantly. And that's why you've got to work fast. If you're doing wet on wet, you've got to work fast. Clean my brush off a little bit and just kind of come back in. That's going to be a bloom if I'm not careful. And I'm not upset about it if it does bloom. Just kind of pull that down. Okay, that's going to be a bloom too. Okay, so now we just let that do what it's going to do and soften itself up. Once that dries, then we're going to come back in here. And it has to dry so we can get that nice crisp edge on this mountain peak. Otherwise, it's going to be too soft. Down in here is great for it to be soft, but I want this to be nice and edgy. All right, so let it dry. We'll be right back. Now, I can see that this is a different color than what he's got there. That's okay. We're just trying to explore the concept and try and get some of these techniques to match as closely as we can. The colors are not going to be exact. The technique is not going to be exact because I am not Sikander, and neither are you. So don't get hung up on that. Let's deal with these the mountain that we have right here, and we'll mix up some gray. So I'm going to do ultramarine blue and some burnt sienna, and it needs to be pretty light. So we're going to say, you know, something like that, and I'm going to put that in and then kind of soften it up as we go. Maybe a little more blue in there. We're wanting that nice hard edge, being kind of irregular with it. It's okay if we get some white spots in there. We want that to happen. And just creating those edges. This is actually darker than I thought it was going to be, but it does dry a little bit lighter. So there's that. Okay, clean our brush off and come in here with a wet brush and just kind of pulling and softening up some of those colors, pulling that into some wet areas, putting water on my paper so it kind of softens into that. Softening up over there to that edge. I can actually do a little softer. He's got some water up in there. I think, again, we're just, kind of making this up. This should be soft on this edge as well. Ultimately, something like that. I mean, that's kind of what we're going for, and I feel like that's kind of where he went with it, and it's not exact. There's our little mountain. Kind of cool. Close. Something. So I put these colors in and then I just kind of softened it up by, pulling that down with some of my water. We're going to have these trees come up in here and kind of cover that up anyway, so it doesn't have to be perfect at all. Let's let that dry by coming in here and doing this big chunk of cliffside. I'm going to do that kind of in a similar way. I'm going to put some color on here, and then as it's wet, I'm going to start dropping more color and more water in there so that it's kind of this wet on wet technique without wetting the paper first. And so I can see that he's got some dark gray up in here. So I'm just going to kind of come around like this and maybe a little more jaggedy. I don't know if he's using a round brush like what I'm using, maybe. And so now I get my brush a little wet, put some wet water in there. I'm going to get a little bit of blue because I want that top edge here to be a little darker, but while it's wet, you put that in there. Now we have all this color down in here. So I've got that gray on my brush that I just put at the top, and I'm just putting that in. I've got some white areas just on accident from painting this kind of loosely. Then I'm just gonna go. I'm gonna go fast. You have to kind of go fast, otherwise it starts to dry, and we don't want that. Now he's got some yellow ochre in there, some more blues and grays. So let's put some more of this gray in here and just kind of dabbing some in there and kind of seeing what happens. And maybe this kind of goes around like that and down like that. Okay, I'm just going for it. Some yellow ochre. We'll put some of that right in there. And this might dry way lighter than I want it to. I'm having the feeling that it's going to. So let's just put some more yellow ochre in there. Now, these paints that I'm using, student grade. Student grade paints mean less pigment, more dyes, and maybe that's not for you. But I like for a lot of my stuff to be approachable for the beginning artist, wanting people to feel like they can accomplish watercolor with somewhat inexpensive materials. Paper is really important. So I always tell my students, make sure you get good paper. Clean my brush off a little bit, just put a little bit of water in there. And pulling this all the way down. Now this is still dry down here, and I want it to stay dry because I want to put these darks in there. These paints from Cotman, which is a branch of the Winsor Newton company, are very affordable. And as a beginning artist, it's less intimidating in a lot of ways. Okay, so he's got some darks in here. Notice I'm putting those in while it's wet, so it's pretty soft, but I'm also kind of dabbing. Do some right there, and then we've got some down in here. And I'm going to put these in with this hard edge while it's on my brush. Usually I work light to dark, but in this case, I want to make sure that I am, it's got some colors right there. I want to make sure that I'm getting those darks in at the very bottom down there. So clean my brush off and just kind of pulling some of those paints, getting that wet in there. Just leave it. I know it's hard to just leave it, but we want to leave it for now. We can come back, and my technique would be to paint a little bit more in there once it kind of dries. Although I think right there we need a little bit more dark. Right in here. And maybe right in there. I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to stop, right? Okay, so we might get some blooms in there and things like that. And I'm okay with that. It's going to be what it's going to be at this point. So let's move on. Now that this is painted, this is pretty dry. My technique, and I don't know if he did it this way, is to paint the lighter trees in first and then continue to build these darks. I don't want to work backwards. I don't want to go up. I want to go down. I'm going to switch to a smaller brush for these little gray trees in the background. So one of the ways that I like to do this is put some water down first. And you're going to put the water down right at the edge where these trees hit and come together. One thing you don't want to do is just have them be sticks sticking up. You want them to kind of touch together at the bottom. So I'm going to put some water where I drew that line. I'm not going to put it in that brown section. I'm just going to put it right there. And then I'm going to get some light gray, so pretty light, because I want these to fade into the background. If you need help figuring out how to paint trees, I have a video on how to paint trees 3 different ways, and I will put a link to that for you also. Now see, I let that hit the water and it just kind of softens up on its own. Put another one over here. Make sure those trees start to touch together. That tree got a little out of hand. That's okay. We'll keep him for now. Okay, so just coming down here, touching it to that water. The way that you can tell that a tree is a tree like these is that it has a pointy top. If you're struggling, just give it a nice, tall, pointy top, and that will help. Over here, let's just kind of soften that up a little bit. And I might put a little bit of gray just kind of on top of that, letting it hit that water. There we go. Now we've got those, and they're going to kind of soften up and do what they're going to do. And come down into here, and we've got some more something back there. I don't even know what that is, but it's going to go back into here a little bit, and it's going to be lighter than what is on our rock face. It has to be. And coming right up to that river line. But maybe just getting some gray and kind of dabbing that in there and just letting it do what it's going to do. Kind of see what it will do. Maybe just creating a little bit of suggestion of maybe there's some more trees back in there. I don't know, but it's got to end right at that river line. So that's looking pretty good. Then from there, we're going to go do these trees, the ones behind the green ones. So we've got these green tall ones. We want to do these guys right here, leaving a nice gap in between. Okay. So I have that tree line kind of right here. I'm going to get it wet underneath. So that way when I bring the trees into it, it softens up. Same concept. So just a pointy tree top, kind of going back and forth, getting gradually wider till it hits that water, and look at how soft it gets. Do some more down here. These are slightly darker, it looks like, on my paper. And maybe I'll do another one, maybe getting a little lighter in there. I don't know what happened to that tree, but that's okay. It's foggy. Nobody knows what happened to that tree. A few more trees, a little taller. That one got a little more brown in it. That's okay. We'll take him. Okay, another tree back in here. So starting with that top little line and then kind of gradually getting wider and wider, very gradual. Just drop a little bit of water in there. Doop, doop, doop. Okay, so there's that. And I'm going to put a few little dots of some dark in there. I don't want that one. Now we're going to let that kind of dry, because what's going to happen is we're going to do these bigger trees, and I don't want those to come in here and touch that and get it wet and soften up and stuff. So we'll just kind of wait on that for a little bit. Let's come in here and paint the undercolor, which is going to be this kind of like pinkish tone that we see, and we're going to paint all the rocks that we see, and then down in here some wet. So I'm going to switch to my number 8 brush for that. And we've got this burnt sienna. Maybe I'll add a little bit of alizarin crimson to that. And very light. We want this to be super light. Gosh, it's even a little more gray than that. It's like a sandstone. Okay, I think that's too dark still. Get a little more water in there. All right, so this is going to come in here like this. Ooh, look at how wet that still is. It's okay. There should have been some more waiting time. Too impatient for that. Okay, so this comes down like that. And we got some color coming down here like this. So I just got some water on my brush and am pulling that down like that. I do want to kind of soften that just a little tiny bit. I don't want to cover up my white because the white's really important. We're going to let everything dry, and then we're going to come back in and do our trees and kind of keep going. So what I'm learning about this is I really should have left some white kind of around here a little bit more. If I were to lift some of it out, let's see what happens. I mean, it's so light already. If I come in here and lift a little bit of that out. So now when I'm doing that, it needs to be softened. Otherwise, it's going to feel like a line, and we don't want it to feel like a line. This is why leaving the whites is so important. So now we're going to come in and we're going to do these trees. It's going to be a nice dark green. Let's get some manganese in there, some cadmium yellow, some ultramarine blue. It needs to be nice and dark. Darker. Notice I'm not rinsing my brush out. Let's put a little bit of burnt sienna. Getting better. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I really like that. We're going to start at the top, kind of just do our little, I'm actually going to do a little tiny point with my smaller brush. So we'll come up here and go whoop, and maybe we'll do a few little tiny pieces. And I just kind of tap that in some of where I was already painting, and it just followed that water. So just getting gradually heavier, wider in my tree as I go down and get closer to this area. I'm gonna get some water because I think normally I would wet this. I'm not sure that he did that. I think he may have dropped water in there, but we're gonna wet it and just see what happens. So there's that. Now once it taps to that water, it just kind of has a mind of its own. All right, so next one. This one I might just use the small brush for all the way down because it's just a smaller tree. And another tree over in here. I could just get my little rigger brush and do it that way. But why would I do that when I can use the back of my brush handle? I mean, really, come on. Another one here. The more water you have on your brush, the harder it's going to be to get that nice little crisp line at the top. The more paint and water, I should say. Okay, kind of dabbing that water in there. And another one. Clean my brush out, dry it off a little bit, kind of pull that just to lighten it up a little bit. It's starting to like disappear into the fog and the whatever. So now we can drop some water in here, and I think that's probably more along the lines of what he did, letting that water kind of creep up. He's got some burnt sienna over in here. I can see that. So we'll put some of that in there. And it's really watered down, but he's got this line right around there. And he's got some, like, I don't know if these are like supposed to be rocks or what, some gray kind of blobs in here. And then just some more water, maybe, making it up as I go, trying to figure it out. So right here, he's got a nice clean line. And right here, it kind of softens up. So I'm going to get some gray, make some gray, ultramarine blue and brown, burnt sienna to be exact. Okay, we'll kind of come up in here and pull that around like that. So as I have less paint on my brush, I do get some of those nice little skipped spots. I'm going to go for a bigger brush to cover more area. And then coming down here, creating that nice clean edge down there as well, kind of softening that up in there. And then down here, put a little bit of brown in here while it's wet. And then we're going to do some really nice dark ultramarine blue and burnt sienna at the bottom, just like we did with that other side. Kind of coming around in here like this. He's got this piece around like that, this front edge right there, and then this kind of comes down. Now this student grade, this is a really good example, the student grade watercolor paint, it's not real dark, it dries pretty light. You can do more layers if you want to. Okay, so something kind of like that. I can skip a few spots if I want to. And now we have some spots in here. We can conquer those while we're using this dark. And I think this comes across something like that. And then we've also got a little rock right here. Another one over in there. And I'm just kind of blobbing these in. Got some over here. Being just a little messy with it. You don't have to do anything real exact or try to do anything perfect. That's not what this is about at all. But you can see it's starting to kind of come together and making sense. Okay, so let's go back over in here. We have a boulder over here, so I can just kind of put, some suggestion of that in there. And his is very soft because he did it when it was wet. So the way we can kind of accomplish that is cleaning our brush off, dry it off a little bit, and come to the bottom of where we made that first line and just kind of soften that up a little bit. leaving that harder edge around the top if we want to. So it starts to kind of communicate that there might be a harder edge there. You can also do something around the top of that edge if you wanted to, where you're kind of softening that up as well. So it starts to just communicate, hey, there's a rock here. Yep, there is. But pretty simple. I'm not doing anything real crazy technical, just paying attention to where those darks are and trying to create some suggestion in there for some darker edges and shapes and kind of softening some of that up. Rocks are one of the things that my students talk about being frustrated about all the time. And I just keep making them paint more rocks. Oh well, they'll have to get over it one day or just get better at rocks. We can move on. So we have that done. Once this kind of dries more, we can come put some darks in there. What we want to do now is work on this rock face. So pretty easy. What it looks like he did is get some nice dark brown and just put a line here, a line here, a line there, and then put a few dark spots in there, kind of soften it up, and that was basically it. So burnt sienna, put a little bit of blue in there, so it's a little less orangey. Gosh, I feel it needs to be a little bit more dark chocolate. And so we'll put a line like that, and something kind of like that. Just kind of put this in here, but then also soften it up because I want that to be really white. Okay, and then we're going to do some of that black, which is ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, as close to black as I can make it with these paints. So if you can't get real black, don't get all hung up about that. It's okay. You can still make a nice painting and work your way up. We have this line under here. And it looks like maybe in this corner there's a little dark area. And right here, there's some rocks or something right there. And he's got this dark here and then something dark there. I'm going to put a little bit more paint right there because I want that to be really dark. He's got some rocks in there. Clean our brush off and put a little bit of paint in here and maybe just a couple little dots. We can also do some really light splatters in here. Get those out of the way. Put a little bit more color back in this. Yeah, those might have been a little too light. So learning as I'm going here, I want these to be a little more on the muted side. To do a little line like that and maybe a couple other little suggestions of maybe the water is flowing. Now I'm gonna leave that alone for now. So let's come down and do this turquoise stuff down here. Maybe more of this manganese. I mean, it could just be manganese with a little bit of like yellow in it. That's a pretty nice color. Now he's got this kind of highlight in here. Let's put this color around the edges and then we'll kind of put some water in here. He's got some dry brushing happening here, which is really nice. We want to be careful and leave some whites around the edges of our rocks. So I'm just going to put some of this in here like this and maybe do some dry brushing right here, just leaning my brush really kind of on its edge. And kind of coming around some of these rocks so it's not fully painted, but light. Go do some more over here. Again, leaving some of my whites around where my rocks are. And this is where we can do some little suggestion of waterfall. Hey, that's looking like it. Clean my brush off, get some water in here and kind of just soften this up so that it doesn't feel like white. I want it to be that light color, but I'm gonna just get it wet and then kind of continue to build this a little bit more. Okay. So he's got this like color coming down here, and I think that's important. It's kind of a burnt sienna gray thing. So let's do this. And maybe it goes all the way down. That will soften up a little bit. Some more color back over in here. Okay, getting that kind of gray. He definitely does this at some point in time where it causes a little bit of blooming to happen right there. And maybe that will kind of soften up a little bit more on its own. His color is really nice in there. Kind of ran out of that blue on my palette. When you're starting out, you have a hard time learning how much color to use to make vibrant watercolors. You don't want to paint like it's an acrylic painting. So what's the balance? How much paint is too much paint? How much water is too much water? You just learn over time. So just got a little bit more of that manganese blue with a little bit of yellow and kind of pulled that back together. We're going to put a little bit more in his little waterfall. I think he probably made this up. I'm not convinced that this actually exists. Having never painted this before and just finding it this morning, it's okay. I'm not mad about it. We're going to do a little bit more black in here. I'm switching back to my number 8 brush. So as I'm layering this darker color, it definitely gets darker, which is nice. It's definitely hard to make this student grade paint dark, but you've got to just do layers unless you're mixing a ton. We're gonna do a few little extra dark detail things, and then we'll do that rock in the front. We have some of these darks in here, and just trying to skip a few spots. Create some suggestion of there are rocks down below, and rocks are defined by shadow. So the shadow behind the other one then defines the space for the one in front of it. That's kind of how that works. And that's when it tends to be the most successful. Let's go a little bit more here, a little bit more there, a little bit more everywhere. Just mixing up more of that ultramarine blue, burnt sienna. Get that dark color. More blue than brown, that's important. Got some here. And just trying to communicate that there's lots of little rocks and textures. He kind of did that by dry brushing. We're going to do a little bit more dark in here. I feel like his are nice and dark and mine could be darker. So I'm just going to get some of that dark come in here like this. And we can soften it up if we need to. But I just felt like his darkness, probably because of the paints that he's using, we're just gonna kind of fudge some of this in here. We had the right idea going into it for sure, but needed to have more paint. Let's just leave it like that for a second and see what happens. Sometimes I like to let it just sit and then kind of go from there. I feel like this also has some needed value. Now we're going to do some black rocks, more of that dark color. All right. Let's see what happens if I use this kind of flat brush. Okay, so just put some black on this brush. Go here. Just kind of soften that up a little bit. I almost forgot the birds. Honestly, birds are like a very low V, and then they have kind of a longer tail. So if you have a low V and then a little dot on the end, it's kind of what they look like. Well, that's basically all there is to it. How do you think it turned out? I hope that you enjoyed hanging out with me today. I will see you next time that I make stuff.